Welcome to the Belong, Grow, Serve podcast. Before the episode begins, we wanted to give a quick content warning as it mentions the Holocaust and sexual assault.
Hi there, this is Ashley Lilly. I'm here with Thad, and he is going to be talking about his wife and kind of recording a memorial for her. Thad, would you like to introduce why you're doing this and just introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. This is Thad Olivent. When my wife Jane passed away a few months ago, she did not want a memorial service or celebration of life or anything like that. She just didn't want any fanfare. She just wanted to be cremated, and that was it. But after thinking about it, I realized, okay, if I didn't do something, it'd be like she didn't exist. So I wanted to at least do this. I won't call it a memorial. I call it like a eulogy, really, of her life. And I guess trying to put 90 years of life in possibly maybe an hour is going to be hard, but I'm going to just catch the highlights of it. So just bear with me if you could. Jane was born May the 4th, 1932, Warsaw, Poland. Her mother and her grandparents were all born in the United States and were American citizens. But they went back to Poland, pre-war Europe, before the war, and that's where Jane was born. Jane had the typical childhood of most any girl from 1 year to 7 years old. Happy-go-lucky, fancy-free, no worries. But September the 1st, 1939, that all changed. That's when Hitler's Germany invaded Poland. It took Germany about to the end of the month to reach Warsaw. And history shows that Warsaw was one of the most bombarded cities in the history of the war. That was the beginning of World War II when that happened. Over 1 million civilians lost their life in that bombardment, and Jane was one of the lucky ones still to be alive. Times were very hard after that. After they invaded, the food was scarce, no water, and there's times when Jane said they would going out to her and Mom would go out and try to find food. They'd walk turn the street corner and down the street. The whole street was lined with people hanging from the gallows, and that's what she called it, gallows, but Jews were hanging from where the Germans could hang them from. Just the whole street was lined that way. She remembers laying awake at night, listening to the rat-a-tat-tat of machine gun fire, knowing that every time she heard that, someone got killed. And what was happening is the Germans were searching every house they could for any Jew they could find. And once the house was searched, they'd move on to the next one. Well, people down the block would realize, okay, they won't go back to the house again, so they'd try to escape and go to that house where they'd be safe, and many times they would get caught, and that's what she was listening to. When they got caught, they would get shot, and that would be it. She's many times, in order to get food, her mom would make her wrap bacon underneath her blouse and hide it so the Germans wouldn't take it away from her. And she would go out to find a place she could find fresh eggs. Some people had chickens, so they would go out and find fresh eggs from them, but her mom would put them in a little cloth and set them on top of her head and put a big bonnet on it to hide them so the Germans wouldn't get that, because they figured they wouldn't search a little girl with a bonnet on her head. Her mother really tried to protect her as much as she could from the atrocities of the war, but it was very difficult because war was just everywhere. This one time, in the early morning, she was watching these German soldiers come by her apartment with wheelbarrows, the empty wheelbarrows. She was wondering, where are they going with all those wheelbarrows? Well, that afternoon, she found out why. They'd come back from the opposite direction. She said all the wheelbarrows had arms and legs hanging out one side or the other. Bodies was piled inside the wheelbarrows. And here again, she wondered, where are they taking all these bodies to? Well, the next morning, when her mom was out looking for food again, they turned the corner, and in the middle of the street was a big fire. They had piled all the bodies up in the middle of the street and set them on fire with fuel oil. One thing she said she'd never forget, as long as she lived, was the stench of the human flesh burning. She said that was a smell it's one of a kind, and she never forgot that. And actually, her being 7 years old, that's not something a little 7-year-old girl ought to witness, but she had to live through that, and it never left her mind as long as she lived. Her mom was a very intuitive person. She also was working for the Polish underground, and she knew a lot about what the Germans were up to, what they're planning on doing, and what have you, because of the information she would get. So one weekend, she sent Jane out to the farm to get her out of the way because she felt something's going to happen. She didn't know why, but she just had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. Sure enough, when Jane got back home, her mom was not there. So she asked the neighbor what had happened. She said the Gestapo, which is the German secret service like we have here, was their secret service, had come in and taken her away and took her to the prison camp. So she said she remembers her telling me that was one of the most loneliest and devastated feelings she ever had at that moment. Here she is, like a 7 or 8 year old girl. No brothers, no sisters. Her father was way at war. Mother was gone now, and she's totally alone. Said she never felt that devastated in her life as she did right there at that moment. She made her way across the city to her aunt's house. Her aunt took her in, but her aunt already had a little girl from an adoption time, but they used her, Jane, and actually they made her do all the housework, all the cleaning. And then the little girl was jealous of her, so she would lie about things that she did in order to get her in trouble and get her punished. Well, the punishment they gave her was her aunt would make her lie down, not lie down, but put rice down on the floor and make her kneel down on top of it. If you don't think that hurts, try it. I did a couple of times, and I tell you, I could only last a few seconds. Jane said she had to stay there sometimes until the rice would eat into her flesh and the knees would bleed. After a while, though, she got a chance to visit her mom in prison, or in a prison camp. They let people, because she wasn't a Jew, so they didn't annihilate her. When she saw her, though, she realized that she was hardly recognizable. They had tortured her, beat her, trying to get her to talk because they knew she had worked for the Polish underground. She had bruises all over her, had cigarette burns all over her body where they had burned her with cigarette butts. But evidently, from what they could tell, she never said anything. She found out, though, why she was there. One of her friends and close neighbors had turned her in order to get compensation from the Germans. And they'd let Germans know that she worked for the Polish underground, and also that she was an American citizen, too. The last thing her mom said to her, the last thing she remembers her telling her told her daughter, don't ever put your trust in man, because man will always deceive you. She says, put your trust in God, because God will always be there. And that's the last thing she remembers hearing her mother say. The Russians came in about 1944 or 45, and liberated Warsaw from the Germans because they had allied with the United States in order to defeat Hitler. But Jane says the Russians were actually as bad or worse than the German soldiers were. A lot of people in that area had gotten dogs to help them protect themselves because of the war. Everybody was looking for food. People were robbing, doing whatever they could in order to get, because there's nothing anywhere to be had. So she had a German Shepherd, and she always took the German Shepherd with her. And says one morning she was walking, her aunt had sent her out for an errand somewhere, and she was, at that time, 45, she must have been about 13. She had developed into a nice-looking young woman. A Russian cornered her in an alley, was going to assault her and rape her. And as soon as he touched her, the dog jumped on him, knocked him down, and protected her from that. She said the soldier was going to pull out his pistol and shoot the dog, and says when he did, she threw herself on top of the dog and told him, if you shoot the dog, you got to shoot me first. And she said she's sure that the Russian was going to shoot her because he had the gun pointed directly at her. But says in the meantime, they had such a ruckus that other people had gathered around, and the Russian soldier saw that and he thought it'd best for him just to leave it alone, so he left away. She said that was very close to her being either killed or raped. If it hadn't been for that dog, she would have been. So she always had a feeling for animals ever since that time. In 1948, she turned 16, and she had an uncle, her mother's sister, that went back to the United States. So he got a hold of the U.S. The war was over at that time. As a matter of fact, later in 1995, Germany surrendered, the war was over. So he got a hold of I don't know if it was a Russian embassy or the U.S. embassy. He got a hold of one of the embassies and told her that she was an American citizen. He was able to get a visa for her to return to the United States, so she did. So they picked her up and took her to Chicago, where they lived. She learned the English language. She spent hours watching TV, reading whatever she could, Polish, English dictionaries, watching movies, doing anything she could to learn the English language. And within 6 months, she was able to speak it pretty fluently. She got a job, moved out on her own, went to work in a factory. I think first place she went was to Johnson & Johnson, running a Band-Aid machine. She met someone, got married. In the meantime, though, her aunt and uncle had to lie about her age because she was only 16. So they lied about her age in order so she could go to work. They told her that she was 2 years old. They told her she was 18 at the time, which she wasn't, but that's why she was able to go to work. It didn't work. She went to work at 16 years old. After about 2 years, she got married and had her first child at age 18. After a while, things was good, but after a while, found out her husband had cheated on her. He had found a woman with lots of money he thought that he wanted. So it turned out that it didn't work out for him, but Jane went ahead and divorced him anyway. So she still stayed in the factory, still working. She met someone else after another year or two, got married again, had 3 more children. The fourth one she had, though, in the meantime, her husband had moved to Tennessee, I think, and then from there they moved to Florida. And on the fourth, which is her daughter, the fourth child she had, she was pregnant with her, and just before she was born, her husband was a salesman, traveling salesman. He was going quite a bit. She found out that he had got another woman pregnant while he was out. So she divorced him. Here she is alone again, but this time she's got 4 children to support because her husband did not give her any money. The money he had, he was going to the other woman he was with. So she could not ever find him to make the law make him pay because he was moving from place to place. It was hard to pin him down to ever get him to pay anything. Anyway, she went to work as a waitress because at Florida, that was at the time, that was the only thing they could find because there's no factories here in Florida like there was up north. The only big place they had was Martin, or Lockheed Martin, or Martin Marietta, but otherwise, she was, because of her background, she was not able to go there, so she went to work as a waitress. And she had to work 2 shifts, or 2 jobs, actually 2 shifts, in order to make ends meet. And that's when I met her. She had worked already from 3 to 11, and now she's working from 11 to 7, back-to-back shifts. It's the only way she can make enough money to support her children. When I saw her that night, there's something about her eyes that just had a sadness to them, and I couldn't figure out. It just intrigued me. And I found out later why, but to make a long story short, she captured my heart, and 6 months later we got married. And I think I've had a podcast before, told all about our marriage. I won't go into that again right now. Just that after we got married, people said naturally it wouldn't work, but here 62 years later we're still here, so evidently something worked real good. What I want to do, though, is really rather than tell you about our marriage, to tell you about the woman herself, what she was, who she was. So Jenny actually had 3 priorities in life: her children, her God, and her country, basically in that order. First was her children. She loved, like most mothers, she loved them dearly, but she was kind of like a mother bear. She was so protective of those kids. You didn't dare say anything or do anything to them. If you did, you had to answer to her. She's very, very protective of them, and you didn't dare say anything to them about them at all. 2 was her God. She had strong faith in God that she didn't show it outwardly, but I remember the first couple of nights when we got married, I was yapping away at her, and I noticed she didn't say anything. So I asked her, why aren't you talking to me? And finally she said, would you stop interrupting my prayer? So I realized then that she was a believer, but later she started praying during the day rather than nighttime. But I knew at that time, what she was and that she was a believer in Jesus. She was Catholic and raised Catholic, but because of her divorces, the Catholics evidently kicked her out of the Catholic Church. They wouldn't let her go to, I don't know if it's Mass or confession, or I'm not familiar with it, though, but so she joined the Methodist Church and went to my church, because she always told me she felt that it didn't matter what church or denomination you was, as long as you believed in Christ, that was all that mattered. And I have to really agree with her on that point. There was times when I say she was very private. She didn't let anyone know. She didn't try to force her religion on anyone else. Matter of fact, her children don't even know that she was a religious person, really. She always made me say grace at every meal. And she made me, on Easter, Christmas time, she'd make me tell them the story, because she wasn't that good at the language to be able to tell them what she wanted to. So I had to sit them down and tell them the Easter story and the Christmas story about Christ, how he was born and how he died. So there was one time, a couple of times, when I'd come in a house and I heard someone talking, and I thought she was with someone, but I walked up to the door, and since she was in the bathroom, the door was just partially cracked open, and she was praying. She would pray for her children. She prayed for me, asking God to keep them safe, keep me safe. She prayed for her neighbors or anybody that was sick, to keep them, make them well. And I noticed that she never asked anything for herself. She prayed for everybody else, but never anything for herself. She was very unselfish in that way. And I heard her do that several times, but I never let her know that I did that, because I didn't want her to be conscious of it. She was a very private person. She always felt that her and her God, what would happen was between them and not nobody else. And that's what she felt about it. Third was her country, her priority-wise. Even though she's born in Poland, she felt a very strong feeling toward the United States. She felt that the USA was her country. She always hated for people to, especially foreigners, to run it down, criticize it. She always told me, she says, if they don't like it here, why don't they go back where they came from? That was a thing she always, matter of fact, she told that to a couple of people one time. They were arguing and complaining about this and that and the other, and she told them, if you don't like it here, why don't you just go back where you came from? She says, this is the greatest country in the world, and that's the way she felt because of what she'd been through. She loved America. So, even though she was an American citizen, raised over there, but she felt that the United States was her country. She saw people protest on TV, and she used to say, why are they protesting? So they should be celebrating, not protesting, because this says if they had to live where I did, they'd be celebrating what's going on, because they have more rights here than they do anywhere else in the world. So she was really a patriot. She always made sure that I put out on, what's the 3 days, Memorial Day and Veterans Day and 4th of July. She always made sure that I put the flag out, flew the flag. She asked me, did you put the flag up? I said, yes, dear. She made sure that she did that, because she's very patriotic. She wanted people to know that, hey, she loved the USA. I guess I think I fell in there probably 4th, or maybe 5th after the dog. It's kind of funny, but she used to kid me about that. She had this little sign. I used to walk the dog. We had a dog for years and years because of the dog she had in Poland. She always wanted a dog. And I'd always walk the dog, did it for 20 years. She had this little sign she put on the refrigerator. And she told me one day, if you don't come back with the doggy, I'm going to make a big sign like this and put it out on the front lawn for everybody to see. And the little sign read, husband and dog lost, $100 reward for the dog. So that pretty well told me where I stood. But Jane was a very intuitive person. I think she got that from her mother because of how her mother felt about the Germans over there. But I could never put anything over on her. She always knew exactly what was going on. I could never surprise her birthdays, Mother's Days, anniversary or any other time, she always seemed like she always knew what was going to happen, that I was going up to something. And I remember one time, it wasn't a holiday, it wasn't her birthday or any other day. I just had been working hard. We hadn't been going anywhere, and I decided I was going to surprise her and take her out to a nice dinner. So I didn't want her to know it though. So I was getting ready to go somewhere. I just told her, I said, "Hey, I got to go to so and so. You want to go with me? I want you to come and go with me." And the first thing she says, "Oh, wait a minute, I'm going to go clean up. I don't want to go to dinner like this." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, I know that's where you're taking me. You're taking me to dinner. I don't want to go to dinner." I said, "Well, how do you know that?" She says, "Hey, there's a lot of things I know that you don't think I do." How she found out, how she realized it, I don't know. She just had that something about her that she always knew. And she kept me out of trouble many times. I guess if it hadn't been for her, if I'd listened to her, I would have been a lot richer today than what I am, because as many times I would want to get involved in something and she would say, "No, don't do that. I have a feeling about that. That's not right or not good, what have you." And there's one time I didn't listen to her. That's when the housing market was back in 2000, I guess in 5. The housing market was really going. You had to be on a lotto in order to get a house. And I had been buying and selling houses, flipping them, making a few $1,000s each time, and this one came up now. She says, "No, that's not right. She don't get involved with that. I have a feeling about that you're going to get stuck." But I didn't listen to her. I went ahead and bought the house anyway. And as soon as I did, within a week, the bubble broke, housing bubble broke. And here I had a $350,000 home that I had to pay for that I couldn't sell because no one wanted houses anymore. So it took me 6 months to get rid of that house. It cost me like $50,000 when it was all done. So finally she said, "One of these days you're going to start listening to me." So she always kept me out of trouble in that respect. Jane was not a very trusting soul. You can understand why, because of what had happened to her in the war and what had happened to her mom. She didn't trust people, and because of that, she didn't make friends very easy. If she did meet someone, they got to know her and made friends with her, she would be the best friend they ever had. She would give their shirt or blouse or whatever right off her back. She'd do anything to work for someone. When we first moved into the neighborhood, when we got married, like usually when someone new comes in, everybody comes over and says, "Welcome you to the neighborhood," and what have you, brings you stuff over. Well, the neighbors got to know her after a month or two. She became I'd say about the go-to person in the neighborhood. Everybody was, "Oh, Jane this, Jane that, Jane, how do you do this? Jane, how do you do that?" And it got to the point where they would call her up and ask her this and that, the other, and keep her on the phone for hours at a time. And she used to complain, "I can't get anything done because everybody's talking to me all day long," because that's how much they thought of her and how much they liked her. And I went to the phone company, and back then they didn't have the portable phones like they got now. All their phones was attached to a cord, so the cord would only reach maybe like 10 feet or less than that. But I went to the phone company and got one of these big, long, coiled up phones. It would even lay down on the floor for a while, but it would stretch out like 25 or 30 feet. It would hook from the phone set to the box itself. So now someone called her, she was able to go it reached from the house we was in, it reached from the kitchen to the dining room, to the laundry room, living room, and the bathroom. She could reach all 4 rooms and never get off the phone. So I would come home and she'd say, "That phone is real nice. I was able to get all my work done today while I was talking on the phone," because they used to keep her on the phone for hours at a time. But now she could go around in the house and do whatever she wanted to do and still talk on the phone. So there was another time, and people remember this person that I remember, a friend she made. Like I said before, anybody that met her and knew her liked her, but she was just very hard to get to know. We were at church, and the church was cold that day. People from the church remember this person, Mina Cinco. Her husband had passed away, but she was sitting in front of us, and she was shivering because for some reason that it was really cool. Matter of fact, Jane had a jacket on also. And she saw Mina shivering. She took off her jacket and reached over and laid it around Mina's shoulders. And Mina turned around, just smiled and thanked her. But after the church was over with, she turned around and gave Jane a big hug. And they sat there and talked for a while. And because of that one act of kindness, they became real close friends and went out to dinner together. Jane took her to a Polish deli's, and they become real close just because of that. So that was the way she was. If anybody needed anything, she was there to help. It didn't, even if it was a stranger. But she just had a hard time making friends because she was very a private person. She stayed to herself and was very like an introvert, I guess. But when you did get to know her, you knew what she was. Around 1990, I guess, she started having some pain, and she went to a doctor when she was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is a disease of the, not a disease, but it's a condition of the nerve endings. Where it usually settles in the upper back, but sometimes it goes all over her whole body, which eventually hers did. She started out taking over-the-counter stuff like Tylenol and Aleve and ibuprofen, stuff like Advil or whatever, but it got to the point where that wasn't enough, so they had to put her on painkillers. She started out on tramadol. From tramadol, she went to hydrocodone. She had to have something stronger, so then they put her on oxycodone. And she started out at 5 milligrams and eventually went to 10 milligrams 4 times a day. And that's what she stayed on for probably the rest of her life. It continued to get worse and worse as life went on. But then in about 2005, she come down with macular degeneration. It's a disease of the macula of the eye. She went to an ophthalmologist. He told her there was a treatment out that would stop it, but the FDA hadn't approved it yet, so he wasn't able to give it to her. So 2 years later, she called her up and says, come back, I can treat you. But when she went back and got examined, he told her it was too late. Her eyes had already gotten scarred to the point where the treatment would not do any good. He says, I can give it to you. It'll keep it from getting any worse, but I can't make you see again like you did before. So she was able to give her this little magnifying glass that she was able to use to, like when she went shopping, she could take and use it to look at the prices. She could had a little light on it. It would magnify everything. She could read the price on the groceries. She could read the ingredients on the back of it. But she wasn't able to read or write because she couldn't read a whole sentence at one time. That was a little light, so she was not able to read anything or write anything. But she got by okay. Like I say, she's able to shop. She's able to do homework, housework, anything she wanted to do. She could watch TV as long as she got up real close to it. But then, like a couple of feet, she could watch it. But she couldn't read or write or make out anything in detail at all. But it didn't seem to bother her too much at that time because she was able to carry on the life as usual. But then in 2000, she just wasn't able to drive, but she didn't worry about it because she felt as long as she had her driver's license, she sooner or later, she'd be able to drive. In 2008, her license come up for renewal, and naturally she wasn't able to renew it because she couldn't see. So they took her license away from her and gave her an ID card. Well, at that point, that hurt her real hard because she realized now I'll never be able to drive again. And that really, at that point, she got very depressed. Depression set in, and everything from that point on went downhill. She was still able to go to church, still able to do things at the house, but her pain started getting worse and worse because the depression made it worse because she got to thinking about everything. No, I can't do this. I can't go here. I can't drive there. That just made her feel even worse about herself. Her last major thing that she went to was our 60th or 50th anniversary. She's able to go to it. But after that, what happened, she stopped going to church regularly because she was just got too much pain. She couldn't go and sit for an hour or two at church. The last major thing she went to was 2015. She went to a Christmas Eve service. She left to go to the Christmas Eve service and see the candlelight service. She always loved that. In 2015, service was the last one she was able to go to. She never went back to church again after that because she just wasn't able to. I guess around that time I had to take over as full-time caregiver because she wasn't able to cook anymore. She wasn't able to keep house. She couldn't see. She couldn't last very long. She was so much pain. She wasn't able to do anything for more than a few minutes at a time. So, make it even worse, she lost her teeth She didn't lose them. She went to a dentist because she had teeth problems. The dentist told her that because of her situation, the condition her teeth was in, it was best to have them all pulled out. So she had all her teeth out. But the problem was that was in 2020, and that's when the pandemic hit. So because of the pandemic, she was not able to go back. Everything was closed. She wasn't able to get back to the dentist. And if she did, sometimes she had appointments, she had to cancel it because she was in so much pain she couldn't go. So it took her 2 years to ever get her new plate in. In the meantime, she couldn't eat anything. The only thing she'd eat was soft foods like scrambled eggs. I made French toast for her. I made so much French toast I almost turned into one, but she loved French toast, scrambled eggs, applesauce, oatmeal. That's the only thing she could eat. That was enough to keep her alive and sustain her, but she lost in that 2 years' time, she lost from 115 pounds down to 80 pounds. She's nothing but just it was hard to watch her deteriorate that way because this once strong, proud woman had now turned into nothing but a skeleton of what she used to be. It was hard to watch her do that. But she actually realized that for herself. She couldn't see herself in the mirror, but she could feel her body. She knew she knew what it probably looked like. And people from the church wanted to come visit her, but she didn't want to have any visitors because she was ashamed of the way she looked, and she didn't want anybody to see her that way. So she never allowed me to have anybody to come visit her. Many times I could see her sitting, feeling of her arms and her face and her body. She could tell that she was going to hardly nothing. She could just imagine in her own eyes what she looked like. And it really made her feel bad because she was once a very beautiful woman. The last year was the worst. She was unable to do anything on her own, period. She couldn't get up out of bed. I had to physically pick her up and put her on a potty. And in the meantime, because of that, she developed these huge bed sores on her body. Some of them were as big as teacups. She had 4 of them. They were more painful than the fibromyalgia was. She always asked me, I couldn't answer, but she says, why has God punished me like this? What have I done? She always asked, what have I done to make him punish me this way? Of course, I couldn't answer. I couldn't tell her. So I just don't know, honey. It finally got to her last prayers were, because she was in pain the way she was, she said, God, please take me. And for the last few weeks of her life, that was the only thing she would say, God, please take me. And I guess he finally did. In January of this year, he took her home. There's lots of adjectives I could use to describe Jamie. She was, I would say, beautiful, intelligent, confident, loving, caring, and many, many more. But if I had to sum it up with one word to describe her life of what the type of person she was, I'd have to use the word remarkable. I've traveled halfway around the world and back and met thousands of people, but she's the most remarkable person, man or woman, that I've ever met in my life. And I know every man or woman has a spouse feels the same way, because I'm prejudiced, I guess, because I'm sure everybody feels the same way about their spouse. But to me, I feel that God broke the mold when he made her, and because she was a very, very unique individual, and she's only one of a kind. And I loved her dearly, and I still miss her terribly. I hope by now you have some idea of the type of person she was, of who you didn't get to know, but and that's about, like I say, that's about all I can say about her. I just hope you say a prayer for me and say a prayer for her. And thank you for listening to this. God bless.
Thank you for sharing that. I know people are going to love to hear her story.
Well, there's many more things I could have said about her, but and especially in the childhood, they were too gruesome. She didn't even want to talk. It took me 60 years to find out some of the things that happened because she didn't want to talk about it. A lot of things, like say, something happened on TV sometimes, and she'd, oh, that reminds me, and she'd tell something that happened back in her childhood, but then she'd start tearing up and start crying. She'd have to stop because the memories is too severe, and I wouldn't push her. I'd say, okay, that's all right. Well, years later, she'd think of something else. She'd tell me again. So it took me a long, long time to find out everything that happened because it was so severe. And some of the things, like I say, I didn't say they're just too gruesome for me to even repeat, so I didn't bring them up. But she had to go through. It's in her words, war was hell, and that's what she used to tell me. So I hope everybody knows now what type of person she was, and I wanted to get that out because that gives me some closure too to know that people know about her, because before they didn't really know her that well because she wasn't able to get out in public that much the last 2 years of her life, so it was hard for people to get to know her.
Right.
And knowing her like I did, it was hard for me to see her degenerate the way she did, but that's life. So I thank you for letting me do this.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping everybody that hears this will think about, what type of person she was, and they miss seeing her.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for sharing, and thank you everyone for listening. Have a good day.